You've suggested this week that, in fact, what we saw during this era was a hijacking of the state rather than state capture. What do you mean by that?
Good day, Stephen, and to the viewers. Thank you for the privilege. I think I was misquoted in saying it wasn't state capture, but it was the hijacking of the state. It was state capture, and I define state capture as hijacking of the state. What I said it wasn't is cadre deployment, because cadre deployment is when a political party is in charge, it then deploys the best trained within its personnel, into strategic positions.
It's quite all right, Professor. It happens. You're not the first person that this has happened to, where the phone just falls over. I'm not entirely sure why they don't sell phones with Zoom stands, but I'm sure they will in a couple of moments. I think you're back with us now. You can please continue with your explanation.
Yeah, just quickly, I said it wasn't state capture, at least insofar as the analysis of the first report of the Commission is concerned. It wasn't cadre deployment, it was state capture. And then state capture is not a party deploying the best within its personnel into state positions. State capture is when a few individuals hijack the state or components of it and repurpose it for private gain.
So what you're saying is that there is a difference between the two. Is that the point? That there's, perhaps what you're saying
exactly.
is there's a critical difference between the two.
Exactly. For example, China runs perfectly. We might disagree with China's approach to human rights and possibly democracy, but that they've been able to have a functioning state and they've become a global competitor is because of cadre deployment.
So would it then be possible, and I think this is, we've had this debate for many years around cadre deployments, and now some of the minutes of the ANC's deployment committee are out in the public domain, so we're going to have the debate again, I think, for the next 2 to 3 years. Do you believe then it is possible, from the Chinese example, to have a well-functioning state with a policy of cadre deployment by the governing policy? Would that be, in a way, I suppose, the end point of your argument?
You can have a well-functioning state with cadre deployment. Look at the U.S. When the Democrats come into office, the senior positions in government are vacated so that they can appoint people who are attuned to their policy. The same thing happens with Republicans. So you can have a functioning state, but can you have a state that is independent, that is oriented towards a democracy that works for all? I'm not very certain, because an ideal public service is one that is apolitical, but it could work better for a public service to be apolitical when people are trained and there is constitutional literacy, there is transparency, but also that there are policies that are tuned to the Constitution as opposed to policies that change whenever government changes and whenever ministers change.
The Chinese example is a really important one, and I think you make an important point there. But it does lead to another question, which is, in China, the decisions are all made by the Communist Party of China, and everyone knows that. There's no dispute around that. And so people who are in government will actually have allegiance to the Communist Party of China first. If I were to try and compose an argument against you, and the Democratic Alliance, I'm sure, and others are going to compose an argument against you, but the argument would probably go like this. If someone is in government, so if, for example, someone is the National Police Commissioner, are they responsible to South Africa, to South Africans, or to the party that deployed them? That might be an interesting argument, an interesting example to debate.
Well, public servants should be loyal to the people and to the Constitution. But that doesn't mean that if there's cadre deployment, automatically people would be I would say, hostile to the Constitution and the people. It's when, of course, the people elect a political party that is not attuned to the Constitution that you're going to get that dissonance.
And there will be quite a lot of dissonance. I mean, I think you could argue that what happened in the United States with some of the appointments made by the then President Donald Trump led to things happening that would be illegal under their constitution.
You're absolutely right. But people are raising a valid question. Do we want cadre deployment? And we haven't heard it. This is the view I take, is that the only time you had pure cadre deployment was the Mandela government, where people from the ANC that had been trained in various countries for their specific portfolios were deployed. Zola Skweyiya did a perfect job in public service because he had been trained in that area. Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, you can complain about Sarafina, but broadly about health policy, she was trained and she did a great job. Then you get Dala Omar, who had a very solid background in law and administration and in human rights and the rule of law. And you can name a whole lot of people. And then you look at the DGs that were appointed to those portfolios, also the same thing. I think over the years, but particularly in the period we're talking about, these people, the names came from the side, and now it appears that those names were discussed or may have been discussed with the Gupta family, and that's what is still to be answered by the Commission of Inquiry.
There's another sort of series of bigger questions, I think, that are emerging out of the Zondo Commission and the Zondo Commission report, which is, will the recommendations actually be implemented? And I mean, there have been various comments in the public domain around this. Again, to quote the ANC chair, Gwede Mantashe, the energy minister, saying that factions in the ANC shouldn't use the Zondo Commission report as an axe against each other. And this gets to another point, which is, I think, again, in China, to use that example, I'm not aware of factions within the Chinese Communist Party. I'm sure they exist, but not in the way that we understand them. And so what that means is deployment may be easier there, because there's only sort of one way to go if you're a deployee. In our situation, if we accept that we have factions in the ANC, and I think the ANC would accept that it has factions, the question then becomes, to which faction is the deployee working?
Well, certainly. And again, we're presuming here we're talking cadre deployments, not people hand-picked by one person. Presumably the president may be advised by a few people outside the ANC. That is not cadre deployment. But if it were proper cadre deployment, firstly, we would know these people in advance, because these are people who would have been trained in the underpinnings of the Constitution, in current public policy, and in whatever the ANC or the DA or whoever would have promised to the people of South Africa. And these are people who would have gone to a school equivalent to the Chinese school of Pudong, or a school of public service, trained, and if they fail, they don't make it, they're not deployed. And therefore, and it wouldn't end there would be transparency. But Stephen, I'm not advocating cadre deployment. I'm just saying we haven't heard it, and therefore we shouldn't blame it.
That's an important point. There's a lot of concern that the recommendations of the Zondo Commission won't actually be implemented, that there won't be political will. I mean, the President has said that they will be. Other people seem to be a little more hesitant about it. What's your sense at the moment? I suppose I could ask a question. What happens if the recommendations are not implemented?
I think the recommendations of the Commission will be implemented depending on various factors. One would be, of course, the actions of the President when it comes to those that could be implemented by him. The next factor is the strength of the NPA, which currently has made it clear that whatever belongs to it will be implemented, and the task team will be assigned this. And then Parliament has to position itself to implement. And one of the things Parliament could do is to immediately enter into a discussion and possibly a political pact that says, do we all agree that state capture is a special form of corruption? Do we all agree that there should be consequences? And do we then all agree that we will support the process and we're not going to sabotage it, as we did with the Public Protector report on guns? And then civil society needs to play a role, and the media is at the core of civil society. I think the media played a role in making sure that reports of the Public Protector were implemented, and the media will have to continue to play that role. Civil society also played a major role in making sure that Public Protector decisions were implemented, and that should continue. I am very hopeful. I honestly think that we're ready to kick dust.
Ma'am, thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate the time. Professor Thuli Madonsela, former public protector, of course, Professor of Social Justice in the Law Department at the University of Stellenbosch. Thank you.